I'd just signed a $10 million recording contract. But when I came home to celebrate with my family, my sister pushed me down the stairs. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive. 3 days in a coma, broken ribs, internal bleeding. And when I opened my eyes, expecting to see worried faces around my hospital bed, the room was empty. Not a single family member, not even a get well card. But that wasn't the worst part. They came all right, but not to comfort me. They came to tell me I deserved every broken bone. What they didn't know was who I had called while they abandoned me. And when they saw him in court, Dad literally collapsed. Let me take you back to where it all started. 3 weeks ago, I was Rebecca Miller, the struggling musician who'd been waiting tables at Danny's Diner for the past 5 years, dreaming of my big break. I'd been sending demos to record labels since I was 16, collecting rejection letters like some people collect stamps. But everything changed when Stellar Records called. Rebecca Miller, this is Marcus Stone from Stellar Records. We'd like to offer you a recording contract. $10 million, 3 albums, full creative control. It was everything I'd ever dreamed of, wrapped up in one phone call that lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. I know because I timed it afterward just to make sure it was real. The first people I wanted to tell were my family. We lived in this picture-perfect colonial house in Maple Grove, the kind with white picket fences and rose bushes that my mom Patricia tended to every morning. From the outside, we looked like the American dream. Dad worked as a bank manager, Mom was a part-time real estate agent, and my older sister Jessica had just finished her master's in business administration. I burst through the front door that Tuesday evening, contract still warm in my hands, heart racing with excitement. Mom, Dad, Jess, you guys are not going to believe this. The family was gathered in our dining room for our usual Tuesday dinner. Mom had made her famous pot roast, the one she only made for special occasions. The irony wasn't lost on me later. It really was about to become a special occasion, just not the kind any of us expected. "What's all the shouting about, honey?" Dad asked, looking up from his newspaper with that patient smile he always wore when he thought I was being dramatic. I got it. I actually got it. I waved the contract in the air like a victory flag. Stellar Records wants to sign me. $10 million, Dad. $10 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Jessica's eyes widened, but not with the joy I'd expected. There was something else there, something that made my stomach twist uncomfortably. That's wonderful, sweetheart," Mom said finally, but her voice sounded strained, like she was forcing the words out. Dad set down his newspaper and reached for his reading glasses, a habit he had when he was processing information he didn't like. 10 million? That seems like an awful lot of money for someone with no real experience in the industry. I felt the first crack in my perfect moment. Dad, I've been performing since I was 12. I've written over 200 songs. This isn't luck. I've worked for this. Jessica snorted softly. When I looked at her, she was cutting her meat with more force than necessary. Finally, Daddy's little princess gets lucky. Jessica, Mom warned, but her tone was half-hearted. What? I'm just saying what we're all thinking. Rebecca gets everything handed to her while the rest of us work our asses off for scraps. The words hit me like a slap. Handed to me? Jess, I've been working 3 jobs while recording demos in a garage studio that floods every time it rains. Nothing about this was handed to me. Dad cleared his throat, that diplomat voice he used when he wanted to diffuse tension. Now, girls, let's not fight. Rebecca, this is big news. We're proud of you. It's just surprising, that's all. But I could see it in their faces, the forced smiles. The way Mom's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. The way Jessica wouldn't meet my eyes. The way Dad's proud sounded more like concerned. You know what? I said, folding the contract carefully. I thought you'd be happy for me. I thought my family would be the first people celebrating this with me. We are celebrating, Mom said quickly. Aren't we, David? Dad nodded, but his smile never reached his eyes. Of course we are, sweetheart. It's just a lot to process. $10 million? That's going to change things. Change things. The way he said it made it sound like a threat rather than a promise. That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to the ceiling when I was 8. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what. My family had always been supportive of my music. They'd driven me to recitals, bought me my first guitar, even co-signed the loan for my professional recording equipment. But there was something in Jessica's voice when she called me princess. Something in the way my parents looked at each other when they thought I wasn't watching. Something that felt like resentment disguised as concern. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house shifted subtly but unmistakably. Mom started making passive-aggressive comments about sudden success going to people's heads. Dad began asking pointed questions about the contract terms, suggesting I should be more conservative with my decisions. And Jessica became openly hostile. "Must be nice to have everything fall into your lap," she said one morning as we passed in the hallway. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Some of us have to work for what we get. Some of us don't get to play pretend for years and then suddenly become millionaires." I stopped walking. "Play pretend? Is that what you think I've been doing?" Jessica turned around, and for the first time, I saw the raw anger in her eyes. "I have 2 degrees, Rebecca. 2 degrees and a mountain of student debt, and I'm making $40,000 a year at a job I hate. You sing songs about feelings, and suddenly you're set for life. So, yeah, from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like playing pretend." That's when I realized what had been bothering me. This wasn't about the money. This was about something that had been festering in my family for years, something I'd been too naive or too hopeful to see. The golden child narrative I'd been living was built on quicksand, and my success had just triggered an earthquake. The night it all fell apart was supposed to be a celebration. I'd convinced my family to let me cook dinner for them, a small thank you for all their support over the years. I'd spent the afternoon making Dad's favorite lasagna and Mom's preferred Caesar salad, even bought a bottle of champagne to toast my new beginning. We were gathered in the living room after dinner, the champagne glasses catching the warm light from the fireplace. I was telling them about the recording studio, about the producer who'd compared my voice to early Joni Mitchell, about the tour they were planning. "It's going to be incredible," I said, unable to contain my excitement. "And the best part is, I can finally pay you guys back for everything. The guitar lessons, the equipment, all those years of believing in me when no one else did." That's when I saw it, a look that passed between my parents, quick as lightning but unmistakable. Disappointment, not in themselves for raising someone ungrateful, but in me for not reading the room correctly. "Actually, Rebecca," Dad said carefully, "your mother and I have been talking and we think you should slow down a bit." "Slow down? Dad, this is my dream. This is everything I've worked for." "Dreams are wonderful, honey," Mom chimed in, "but they're not always realistic long-term. Maybe you should think about investing this money wisely instead of spending it on frivolous things." Frivolous things. My music career was frivolous things. Jessica, who'd been unusually quiet during dinner, finally spoke up. "What they're trying to say is that some of us could really use help right now. Real help, not champagne and celebration dinners." "Help?" I looked around the room, suddenly feeling like I was in a play where everyone knew their lines except me. "What kind of help?" "Well," Dad said, adjusting his glasses, "Jessica's student loans are quite substantial, and your mother and I have been struggling with the mortgage payments since the bank restructured my department." The room felt like it was tilting. "You want me to pay off Jessica's student loans?" "Not pay off," Mom said quickly. "Just help. Family helps family, Rebecca. That's what we do." I stood up, the champagne glass slipping from my numb fingers and shattering on the hardwood floor. "Let me get this straight. I just signed the biggest deal of my life, and instead of being happy for me, you're asking me to hand over my money?" "Don't be dramatic," Jessica snapped. "We're not asking you to hand over anything. We're asking you to remember where you came from, to remember the people who supported you when you had nothing." "Supported me? Jessica, you just told me I was playing pretend." "Girls, please." Dad stood up, his voice taking on that authoritative tone that used to make us both fall in line as children. "Let's all calm down and discuss this rationally." But I was beyond rational. Years of feeling like I had to prove myself. Years of being the family's bright spot while secretly struggling to make ends meet. Years of believing that my success would finally make them proud. It all came crashing down in that moment. You know what? You're right. I am being dramatic. I laughed, but it sounded hollow even to my own ears. I'm being dramatic by thinking my own family would be happy for me instead of seeing me as a walking ATM. I turned to leave, but Jessica's voice stopped me cold. Where are you going, princess? Running away when things get real? I spun around. Real? You want to know what's real, Jess? Real is working 3 jobs while chasing a dream that everyone told me was impossible. Real is eating ramen noodles for dinner so I could afford studio time. Real is getting rejection letter after rejection letter and still believing in myself when no one else did. Oh, please! Jessica stood up, her face flushed with anger. You think you're the only one who struggled? You think you're the only one with dreams? I gave up my dreams to be practical. I did what Mom and Dad wanted me to do, and where did it get me? Drowning in debt while my little sister gets to play rock star. The hurt in her voice was real, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Until she took a step closer and I saw something dangerous in her eyes. You want to know what I really think, Rebecca? I think you've always been selfish. I think you've always thought you were special, and now that you've got money, you think you're better than us. That's not true. Isn't it? Look at you right now. We're your family, and you can't even help us out. What's $10 million to you? What's a few $100,000 to help your sister get out of debt? What's helping your parents keep the house they raised you in? The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost missed it. Almost. But there it was. The subtle shift from celebration to obligation, from family support to family guilt. Jessica, I would help you guys. Of course I would. But not like this. Not as an expectation. Not on the same night I'm trying to share my good news with you. There it is, she said, throwing her hands up. The real Rebecca Miller, everyone. Too good to help her family because it might inconvenience her precious celebration. That's when she moved. It happened so fast that I'm still not sure if it was intentional or if she just got caught up in her own anger. But one moment she was standing in front of me, gesticulating wildly, and the next moment her hands were on my shoulders, pushing me backward. I was at the top of our staircase. The same staircase I'd run up and down 1,000 times as a child, the one with the loose banister that Dad kept saying he'd fix. I felt my foot slip on the edge of the top step, felt my balance give way, felt the sickening moment of weightlessness before gravity took over. The fall seemed to last forever and an instant simultaneously. I remember the sound my body made hitting the stairs, a series of thuds and cracks that didn't sound human. I remember the pain shooting through my ribs, my head, my back. I remember thinking, as consciousness faded, that this couldn't be happening. Not tonight, not like this. The last thing I heard before the darkness took me was Jessica's voice, high and panicked. Oh my God, she fell. Mom, Dad, she fell. But even in that moment of fading consciousness, something bothered me about her tone. It wasn't the voice of someone who'd just watched their sister accidentally fall down the stairs. It was the voice of someone who was already practicing their story. When I woke up 3 days later in the ICU at St. Mary's Hospital, the world felt different, smaller, more fragile. The doctor who introduced himself as Dr. Harrison explained that I'd been in a medically induced coma while they stabilized my condition. 3 broken ribs, a concussion, internal bleeding, and a bruised spinal cord that had made them worry about permanent damage. You're very lucky, he said, checking my chart. A fall like that could have been fatal. You must have someone looking out for you up there. I tried to speak, but my throat felt like sandpaper. A nurse, her name tag read Carol, helped me sip some water through a straw. My family, I finally managed to croak. Where's my family? Dr. Harrison and Carol exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret. Your family. Well, they were here when you were first brought in. They stayed for a few hours, but... But what? Carol sat down in the chair next to my bed, her expression gentle but troubled. Honey, no one's been here to see you since that first night. We called the number on your emergency contact form several times, but the room started spinning, and not from the concussion. No one's been here? For 3 days? I'm sorry, sweetheart. The nurses on the previous shifts mentioned that your family seemed upset. There was some kind of argument in the waiting room that first night. Security had to ask them to keep it down. I closed my eyes, trying to process this information. My family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, who were supposed to be holding vigil by my bedside, had abandoned me. While I was fighting for my life, they were having arguments loud enough to disturb other patients. Did they say anything? Leave any messages? Carol hesitated. Your sister called yesterday. She asked about your condition, and when I told her you were stable and likely to make a full recovery, she said that was good to know and that they'd be in touch when you were ready to talk sense. Ready to talk sense. As if I was the one being unreasonable. As if I was the one who needed to apologize. That afternoon, alone in my hospital room with nothing but the steady beep of monitors for company, I replayed the events of that night over and over in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that Jessica's push hadn't been accidental. The angle was wrong. The force was too deliberate. And her reaction afterward, that practiced panic, that immediate shift to victim mode, it all felt rehearsed. But the worst part wasn't the physical pain or even the betrayal. It was the slow, creeping realization that this moment had been building for years. Every time I'd shared good news and been met with lukewarm responses, every time my achievements had been downplayed or dismissed, every time I'd been made to feel guilty for succeeding when others in my family were struggling. I'd been the family scapegoat disguised as the golden child, and I'd been too naive to see it. On my 4th day in the hospital, they came. I heard familiar voices in the hallway outside my room, Mom's nervous laugh, Dad's authoritative tone, Jessica's defensive explanations to what sounded like a nurse. My heart rate picked up on the monitors, and for a moment, I felt a surge of relief. They'd come. Despite everything, they'd come to see me. But when they walked into my room, I could see immediately that this wasn't a visit born of love or concern. This was an intervention. Mom approached my bed first, her face a carefully constructed mask of sympathy that didn't quite reach her eyes. Oh, honey, look at you. How are you feeling? Before I could answer, Dad stepped forward. Rebecca, we need to talk. Not, we're so glad you're okay, or we were worried sick, or even, we're sorry we weren't here sooner. Just, we need to talk, delivered in the same tone he'd used when I was 16 and had dented the car. Jessica hung back by the door, arms crossed, looking anywhere but at me. The guilt was written all over her face, but it was mixed with something else. Defensiveness, maybe even resentment. We've been thinking about what happened the other night, Mom continued, perching on the edge of the visitor's chair like she didn't plan to stay long. And we think there are some things that need to be addressed. I stared at her in disbelief. Things that need to be addressed? Mom, I almost died. Now don't be dramatic, Dad said, checking his watch like this was just another appointment on his calendar. The doctor said you're going to be fine. A few bumps and bruises, that's all. A few bumps and bruises. 3 broken ribs, a concussion, and internal bleeding were just bumps and bruises. Jessica feels terrible about what happened, Mom said, shooting a meaningful look at my sister. Don't you, Jess? Jessica finally stepped forward, but her apology sounded like it had been written by committee. I'm sorry you fell, Rebecca. I never meant for you to get hurt. Notice what she didn't say. She didn't say she was sorry for pushing me. She was sorry I fell, as if it had been an act of God rather than a direct result of her actions. The thing is, Dad continued, what happened that night just proves that this whole situation has gotten out of hand. All this money, this sudden success, it's created tension in our family that never existed before. I felt like I was in an alternate universe. The tension exists because you're treating me like an ATM instead of your daughter. See? Jessica spoke up for the first time, pointing at me like I'd just proved her point. That's exactly what we're talking about. You've become so defensive, so paranoid. We're your family, Rebecca. We want what's best for you. What's best for me? What's best for me is having a family that celebrates my success instead of resenting it. Mom made a soft tutting sound, like I was a child having a tantrum. Nobody resents your success, sweetheart. We're proud of you, but pride and practicality are two different things. Your mother's right, Dad said, pulling out his reading glasses. Always a bad sign. We've been talking to a financial advisor, and he says that windfall money like this is often mismanaged by people who aren't used to having it. So, you're saying I'm not capable of managing my own money? We're saying you're emotional right now, Jessica interjected. You're hurt, you're angry, and you're not thinking clearly. Maybe it would be better if someone more objective helped you make decisions about your future. The audacity was breathtaking. I was lying in a hospital bed because of her actions, and she was suggesting I wasn't thinking clearly. You know what? I said, my voice stronger than it had been since I'd woken up. You're right. I am angry. I'm angry that my sister pushed me down the stairs and then played victim. I'm angry that my parents abandoned me in the hospital for 3 days. And I'm angry that instead of apologizing, you're all standing here trying to gaslight me into thinking I'm the problem. The silence that followed was arctic. Mom's carefully constructed sympathy mask finally slipped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. We came here to help you, she said, her voice losing its gentle tone. But if you're going to be ungrateful and accusatory, then maybe we should leave. Ungrateful? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Ungrateful for what? For being pushed down the stairs? For being abandoned when I needed you most? For being treated like a walking paycheck instead of your daughter? Dad stood up abruptly, his patience clearly exhausted. That's enough, Rebecca. You've always been dramatic, but this is too much, even for you. You've always been selfish, Mom added, standing as well. Even as a child, everything had to be about you, your music, your dreams, your problems. Well, guess what, sweetheart? Other people have problems too. And maybe, Jessica said, moving closer to my bed with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, this little wake-up call is exactly what you needed. Maybe now you'll stop thinking the world revolves around you and start remembering that you have obligations to the people who raised you. I stared at the 3 people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and for the first time in my life, I saw them clearly. Not as the supportive family I'd always believed them to be, but as what they really were. People who had invested in my potential success and were now demanding their return on investment. Get out, I whispered. What? Mom asked, as if she hadn't heard correctly. Get out of my room. Get out now. Dad's face reddened. Rebecca, you're being ridiculous. I said get out. My voice was stronger now, fueled by an anger I didn't know I possessed. All of you get out and don't come back. They left, but not before Jessica delivered one final blow. This is what I'm talking about, she said to our parents, loud enough for me to hear. She's completely lost perspective. Maybe when she's ready to be part of this family again, she'll know where to find us. When the door closed behind them, the silence was deafening, but for the first time since I'd woken up, I felt like I could breathe. The people who were supposed to love me had shown their true faces, and while it hurt more than any physical pain I'd ever experienced, it was also liberating. I was done being their golden child. I was done being their scapegoat. I was done being anything other than exactly who I was, Rebecca Miller, the girl who'd just signed a $10 million recording contract and was about to learn what it really meant to stand on her own. But first, I had a phone call to make, and when my family saw who I'd called during those 3 days they'd abandoned me, their world was going to collapse just as completely as mine had. After my family left that day, something fundamental shifted inside me. The girl who had spent 30 years trying to earn love that was never really there died in that hospital room, and someone new was born. Someone who understood that family isn't about blood, it's about respect, support, and genuine care. The first person I called wasn't another family member or even a friend. It was my physical therapist, Maria Santos, who'd been coming to my room twice daily since I'd regained consciousness. She was the one who'd planted the seed that would eventually grow into my awakening. "Rebecca," she'd said during one of our sessions, watching me struggle to sit up without wincing, "I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've seen a lot of family dynamics, but I have to ask, is everything okay at home?" When I'd looked at her with confusion, she'd continued gently, "In my experience, when someone suffers a traumatic injury like yours, family members are usually here around the clock. They bring flowers, cards, pictures from home. They ask detailed questions about recovery time and therapy options. They're present." That conversation had been the first crack in the foundation of my denial. Maria had seen what I'd been too emotionally invested to recognize, that my family's behavior wasn't normal, wasn't loving, and definitely wasn't healthy. Now, 3 days after their visit, I asked Maria to stay after our session. "You mentioned that family dynamics can affect recovery," I said carefully. "What did you mean by that?" She sat down in the visitor's chair, the same one my mother had perched on like she couldn't wait to leave. "Rebecca, I'm not a therapist, but I've worked with enough trauma patients to recognize certain patterns. Sometimes the trauma isn't just physical. Sometimes families can be—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Challenging." "Challenging how?" "Well, in healthy family systems, a crisis like this brings people together. They rally around the injured person. They ask how they can help. They prioritize the victim's needs above their own comfort or convenience." She looked at me directly. "That's not what I observed during your family's visit." I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot I hadn't even realized was there. "So I'm not crazy? Their behavior was actually unusual?" "Honey, in 15 years of doing this job, I've never seen a family visit someone in the ICU to lecture them about being dramatic. That's not normal. That's not loving, and it's certainly not supportive." That night, I called the hospital's social worker, Janet Thompson. She came to my room the next morning with a warm smile and a notepad, ready to listen to whatever I needed to say. "Maria Santos suggested I speak with you," I began, then found myself pouring out the entire story. Not just what had happened in the hospital, but years of subtle manipulation, financial expectations, and emotional invalidation that I was only now beginning to recognize. Janet listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions that helped me see patterns I'd missed. "Rebecca, what you're describing sounds like a family system where love is conditional on performance and compliance. That's not healthy, and it's not your fault." "But they're my family," I said, echoing the argument I'd been having with myself for days. Family is supposed to be a source of support, not stress. It's supposed to be a safe harbor, not a performance stage. She handed me a pamphlet about family dysfunction and trauma. "Take a look at this when you're ready. And remember, just because someone is related to you doesn't mean they have the right to treat you poorly." That pamphlet changed everything. As I read through descriptions of narcissistic family systems, scapegoating, golden child syndrome, and financial abuse, I felt like someone had handed me a map to a country I'd been living in my whole life without knowing its name. The scapegoat who gets blamed for family problems, check. The golden child who's only valued for their achievements, check. Financial exploitation disguised as family obligation, check. Gaslighting and emotional manipulation, check, check, and check. For the first time in my life, I had language for what had been happening to me. I wasn't dramatic, oversensitive, or ungrateful. I was the victim of a dysfunctional family system that had conditioned me to accept unacceptable treatment. That revelation was followed quickly by anger, not the hot, explosive kind I'd felt in the hospital room, but a cold, focused fury that burned steady and clear. They had stolen 30 years of my life, making me believe that their love was something I had to earn, something I could lose if I didn't perform correctly. But the anger was productive. It gave me energy, clarity, and most importantly, motivation. I started by researching family law attorneys who specialized in financial abuse and traumatic injury cases. The internet is a wonderful thing when you're lying in a hospital bed with nothing but time and determination. The name that kept coming up was Jonathan Blackwood of Blackwood, Sterling and Associates. He was known for taking on high-profile cases involving family exploitation, particularly in the entertainment industry. His success rate was impressive, but more importantly, the testimonials on his website told stories that sounded eerily similar to mine. When I called his office, I expected to be shuffled off to a paralegal or told he was too busy to take my case. Instead, his assistant put me through directly. "Ms. Miller," his voice was crisp, professional, but warm. "I understand you're calling from St. Mary's Hospital. Are you all right?" I gave him the condensed version of events, focusing on the facts rather than the emotions. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Ms. Miller, I'm going to ask you a difficult question, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Do you believe your sister pushed you down those stairs intentionally?" The question I'd been avoiding for days hung in the air between us. "Yes," I said finally. "Yes, I do." "In that case, you're not just dealing with family dysfunction. You're potentially dealing with assault and battery. Are you prepared for what that means?" "What does it mean?" "It means that if we can prove intentional harm, your sister could face criminal charges. It means your family's financial dependence on you could be classified as exploitation. It means this stops being a private family matter and becomes a legal case that could end up in the newspapers." I thought about Jessica's face when she'd pushed me, the calculation behind her eyes. I thought about my parents' cold dismissal of my injuries. I thought about 30 years of putting their needs before my own happiness. "Mr. Blackwood, I've spent my entire life trying to keep my family happy. Where did that get me? Alone in a hospital bed while they lecture me about being dramatic. I'm done protecting people who refuse to protect me." "In that case, Ms. Miller, I think we should meet. I'll be there tomorrow afternoon." Jonathan Blackwood was not what I'd expected. He was younger than his reputation suggested, maybe 45, with graying temples and the kind of sharp intelligence that made you feel like he was reading between the lines of everything you said. He came to my hospital room with a briefcase full of documents and a recording device that he set on my bedside table with my permission. "Tell me everything," he said. "Start from the beginning and don't leave out anything you think might be irrelevant. In cases like this, patterns matter more than individual incidents." So I told him everything. About being the family's emotional caretaker from a young age. About the subtle financial pressure that had ramped up over the years. About the way my achievements were simultaneously celebrated and resented. About the looks my parents had exchanged when I'd offered to pay them back. About Jessica's jealousy and the calculating way she'd positioned herself before pushing me. Jonathan took notes throughout, occasionally asking for clarification or specific dates. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and studied me carefully. "Rebecca, I'm going to be honest with you. Family exploitation cases are complex, emotionally difficult, and often very public. Your family will likely hire their own attorney, and they'll paint you as ungrateful, mentally unstable, and vindictive. They'll try to use your success against you, claiming that fame has gone to your head. And if I don't pursue this, then they'll continue to see you as their personal ATM, and there's a good chance the physical violence will escalate. People who are willing to push someone down the stairs once are usually willing to do it again." I closed my eyes, thinking about the choice in front of me. On one side was the family I'd always known, dysfunctional and manipulative, but familiar. On the other side was the unknown, a legal battle that would expose our private dysfunction to the world, but might finally give me the freedom to live my own life. When I opened my eyes, Jonathan was waiting patiently for my decision. "What do you need from me?" He smiled, the first genuine warmth I'd seen from him. "First, we need evidence. Do you have any documentation of their financial dependence on you? Bank records, loan agreements, anything that shows a pattern of you supporting them financially?" "I have copies of everything on my laptop at home. I've been helping with their mortgage payments for 2 years, and I paid for Jessica's graduate school." "Excellent. Second, we need to document your injuries thoroughly. I'll arrange for an independent medical examination to supplement the hospital records. Third, we need to establish the intentional nature of your sister's actions." "How do we do that?" "Security cameras. Most modern homes in your neighborhood have doorbell cameras, and many have interior security systems. If we can get footage of the incident, it could be game-changing." I thought about our house, about the Ring doorbell Dad had installed last year, about the security system that monitored the main living areas. My parents will never give you access to those recordings. They won't have a choice if we get a court order. And Rebecca? He leaned forward slightly. People who are innocent don't usually refuse to hand over evidence that would exonerate them. Over the next week, while I continued my physical recovery, Jonathan worked behind the scenes to build our case. He obtained my medical records, documented my injuries, and filed preliminary motions to preserve any security footage from my family's home. He also connected me with Dr. Sarah Chen, a therapist who specialized in family trauma and testified as an expert witness in cases involving emotional abuse. Your family has conditioned you to believe that their needs are more important than your well-being, Dr. Chen explained during our first session. That's not love, Rebecca. That's programming. She helped me understand the psychological mechanisms behind my family's behavior, how they'd used intermittent reinforcement to keep me seeking their approval, how they'd isolated me from outside perspectives that might challenge their narrative, how they'd made me responsible for managing their emotions while dismissing my own. The hardest part of recovery, she told me, is accepting that the people who were supposed to protect you were actually the ones harming you. But once you accept that truth, you can start building a life based on reality instead of wishful thinking. Meanwhile, I was getting stronger physically. The bruising faded, my ribs healed, and I was able to move around without assistance. But more importantly, I was getting stronger emotionally. Every session with Dr. Chen, every conversation with Jonathan, every day that passed without contact from my family, reinforced the same truth. I deserved better than what they'd given me. The breakthrough came 2 weeks after I'd hired Jonathan. He arrived at the hospital with a tablet and an expression I couldn't quite read. Rebecca, we got the security footage. He placed the tablet on my bedside table and pressed play. The video was from the camera in our living room, angled to capture the staircase and the surrounding area. I watched myself standing at the top of the stairs, contract in hand, trying to share my joy with my family. I watched Jessica approach me, her face twisted with anger, and I watched in crystal clear detail as she placed both hands on my shoulders and shoved me backward with obvious intent. There was no mistaking it for an accident, no way to claim it was a moment of passion or a gentle push that went wrong. Jessica had deliberately, with malicious intent, pushed me down the stairs hard enough to send me tumbling. That's assault with intent to cause bodily harm, Jonathan said quietly. Possibly attempted murder, depending on how aggressive the prosecutor wants to be. I stared at the screen, watching the moment that had changed everything, and felt a strange sense of vindication. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't oversensitive. I was the victim of a deliberate attack by someone who was supposed to love me. What happens now? Now we go to court. I'll file both civil and criminal charges. The civil case will focus on the financial exploitation and the assault. The criminal case will be handled by the district attorney's office, but our evidence will support their prosecution. And my family? Your family is about to learn that actions have consequences. They'll be served with papers within the week. I nodded, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in my life, I wasn't responsible for managing my family's emotions or protecting them from the natural consequences of their behavior. Jonathan, when this goes to court, when they're sitting across from me in that courtroom, what will they see? He gathered his papers and closed his briefcase, then looked at me with something that might have been pride. They'll see someone who refuses to be a victim anymore. They'll see someone who has chosen justice over comfort, truth over family mythology. And they'll see exactly what they lost when they decided to treat you as an asset instead of a daughter. The papers were served on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't there to see it, but Jonathan's private investigator reported that my father had answered the door in his bathrobe, clearly expecting a package delivery instead of legal documents that would change his life forever. According to the report, Dad had read the summons twice before calling for Mom and Jessica. There had been shouting, crying, and at least one phone call to a lawyer who apparently told them exactly how much trouble they were in. Within an hour of being served, my phone started ringing. First Mom, then Dad, then Jessica, then all three of them in various combinations. I didn't answer any of the calls, but I listened to the voicemails, and the progression was fascinating from a psychological standpoint. The first messages were apologetic. "Honey, we need to talk. This has all gotten out of hand. We love you, and we can work this out." The next round was bargaining. "Rebecca, we're willing to compromise. Maybe we were too pushy about the money thing. Call us back, and we'll figure this out as a family." By the third round, they'd moved into anger. "Rebecca, this is ridiculous. We're your family. How can you drag us through the courts over a simple misunderstanding?" And finally, the threats. "If you think you can destroy this family with your lies and manipulation, you're wrong. We have lawyers too." Dr. Chin had warned me about this pattern. When you stop playing your role in a dysfunctional family system, the other members will try everything to get you back in line. They'll love bomb you, guilt you, threaten you, and finally try to destroy you. But what they won't do is take responsibility for their actions. She was right. Not once in any of those voicemails did anyone apologize for pushing me down the stairs. Not once did anyone acknowledge that leaving me alone in the hospital had been wrong. They were sorry I was upset, sorry there had been a misunderstanding, sorry things had gotten so complicated, but they weren't sorry for what they'd actually done. The civil case moved faster than I'd expected. Jonathan was thorough, methodical, and absolutely ruthless in his documentation of my family's financial dependence on me. Bank records showed that I'd contributed over $200,000 to their household expenses over the past 5 years, including mortgage payments, car payments, credit card bills, and Jessica's student loans. "The pattern is clear," he explained to me as we prepared for the first hearing. "They've been treating you as their personal financial institution while simultaneously undermining your self-worth and independence. That's textbook financial abuse." The criminal case was proceeding separately but on a parallel track. The district attorney, a sharp woman named Lisa Rodriguez, had reviewed the security footage and was pursuing assault charges against Jessica. "This isn't a domestic dispute or a family argument that got out of hand," she told me during our preparation meeting. "This is one person deliberately harming another person. The fact that they're related actually makes it worse, not better." My family hired their own legal team, an expensive firm that specialized in crisis management and damage control. Their strategy became clear during the pre-trial motions. Paint me as an unstable, vindictive daughter who was using my newfound wealth to destroy the family that had sacrificed everything for her success. Their lawyer, a slick man named Robert Sterling, actually had the audacity to argue that my sudden windfall had caused a psychological break that made me unable to distinguish between normal family dynamics and abuse. Jonathan's response was swift and devastating. "Your Honor, the defense is essentially arguing that financial success makes someone incapable of recognizing assault. That's not just offensive, it's absurd. The security footage speaks for itself, as do 5 years of bank records showing systematic financial exploitation." The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Margaret Wu, was not impressed with the defense's strategy. "Mr. Sterling, unless you're prepared to argue that your client's actions in pushing Ms. Miller down the stairs were somehow justified, I suggest you focus on the facts rather than amateur psychological evaluation." The first major hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning in October. I'd been out of the hospital for 3 weeks by then, staying in a hotel suite that Jonathan had recommended for security reasons. My family knew where I lived, and there had been several incidents of them showing up at my apartment building, demanding to speak with me. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep, not from fear or anxiety, but from anticipation. For 30 years, I'd been trained to put my family's comfort before my own truth. Tomorrow, for the first time in my life, the truth would matter more than their feelings. Dr. Chin had prepared me for what to expect. They'll try to make eye contact with you to trigger your old emotional patterns. They'll look hurt, confused, betrayed. They might even cry. Remember, those are performance emotions designed to manipulate you. Don't let them work. I dressed carefully that morning. A navy blue suit that looked professional but not ostentatious, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a successful woman who refused to be a victim. Jonathan met me in the courthouse lobby. "You ready for this?" "I've been ready for 30 years. I just didn't know it." We walked into the courtroom together, and I saw my family for the first time since that horrible day in the hospital. They were sitting at the defendant's table with their legal team, dressed in their Sunday best and looking like the picture of wholesome American family values. Dad was wearing his best suit, the one he'd bought for my high school graduation. Mom had on the dress she wore to church, complete with the pearl necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. Jessica was in a conservative black dress that made her look young and innocent. They all turned when I walked in, and for a moment I felt the old familiar tug of guilt and responsibility. They looked so hurt, so confused, so betrayed. How could I be doing this to them? But then I remembered the security footage. I remembered waking up alone in the hospital. I remembered 30 years of conditional love and emotional manipulation. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table and looked straight ahead, refusing to meet their eyes or acknowledge their presence. I was done being responsible for their emotions. When the judge called the court to order, everything else faded away except for the truth that was finally about to be told. "Your Honor," Jonathan began, standing to address the court, "this case is about a family that forgot the difference between love and exploitation, between support and control. The evidence will show that the defendants systematically abused the plaintiff's generosity, undermined her independence, and when she finally achieved the success she'd worked her entire life for, they responded with violence." He played the security footage for the court. In the silence that followed, you could have heard a pin drop. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. Jessica had deliberately pushed me down the stairs, and everyone in that courtroom could see it. When the video ended, I finally allowed myself to look at my family. Dad's face was white as paper. Mom was crying. Not the performative tears I'd seen so many times before, but real, genuine tears of someone who finally understood the magnitude of what they'd done. And Jessica was staring at the defense table, unable to look at the screen, unable to look at me, unable to face the reality of her own actions. "Your Honor," the defense attorney said, standing on shaky legs, "we'd like to request a recess to discuss our options with our clients." Judge Wu looked at him with barely concealed disgust. "Mr. Sterling, I think that's probably a very good idea." During the recess, Jonathan and I sat in a conference room while my family huddled with their legal team down the hall. Through the thin walls, I could hear raised voices, tears, and what sounded like my father saying, "How could you not tell us it was on video?" "They're going to want to settle," Jonathan predicted. "The security footage changes everything. They can't claim it was an accident anymore, and they can't claim you're lying about the family dynamics when we have 5 years of financial records." He was right. 20 minutes later, Robert Sterling knocked on our door, looking like a man who'd just lost his biggest case. "My clients would like to discuss a settlement." The negotiation was swift and brutal. My family would plead guilty to the assault charges in exchange for no jail time and community service. They would repay every dollar I'd given them over the past 5 years, with interest. They would agree to a permanent restraining order that prohibited them from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my home, workplace, or any public appearances. Most importantly, they would sign a confession acknowledging their pattern of financial and emotional abuse, which would be filed with the court as part of the public record. "They want one thing in return," Sterling said, looking uncomfortable. "They want to speak with Rebecca directly, just for 5 minutes, to apologize." Jonathan started to object, but I held up my hand. "It's okay. I'll hear what they have to say." We reconvened in the courtroom with everyone present. Judge Wu had agreed to oversee the apology to ensure it was genuine and not another attempt at manipulation. My father spoke first, his voice shaking with emotion. "Rebecca, we failed you. We were supposed to protect you, and instead, we hurt you. There's no excuse for what we did, and there's no excuse for how we treated you in the hospital. You deserved better from us. You deserved better from me." Mom was next, tears streaming down her face. "I was supposed to be your mother, but somewhere along the way, I forgot what that meant. I let my own fears and insecurities turn me into someone who saw you as a solution to our problems instead of a daughter to be loved unconditionally. I'm sorry. I'm so, so sorry. Finally, Jessica stood up. She looked directly at me for the first time that day, and what I saw in her eyes wasn't anger or resentment, but something that might have been relief. Rebecca, I pushed you. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a moment of passion. I was jealous, I was angry, and I wanted to hurt you. I've spent the last 2 months lying to myself and everyone else about what really happened, but I can't do it anymore. She took a shaky breath. You almost died because of me, because I couldn't handle your success. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't expect you to ever want to see me again. But I need you to know that what happened was about my failures, not yours. You didn't deserve any of this. The silence that followed was profound. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 30 years lifting off my shoulders. Thank you, I said simply. Thank you for finally telling the truth. Judge Wu made the settlement official, and just like that, it was over. My family walked out of the courtroom and out of my life, and for the first time in 30 years, I was completely free. In the months that followed, I threw myself into my music with an intensity I'd never experienced before. The album I recorded for Stellar Records was raw, honest, and deeply personal. Songs about breaking free from toxic relationships, about finding your own worth, about the difference between family and people who happen to share your DNA. The title track, Golden Child, became an anthem for people who'd survived family dysfunction. The music video, which showed a young woman literally breaking out of a golden cage, went viral and sparked conversations about family trauma that reached millions of people. I started a foundation called Found Family that provided resources and support for people dealing with family estrangement and abuse. I spoke at conferences, wrote articles, and used my platform to shine a light on issues that had been hidden in shame for too long. Dr. Chen remained my therapist, helping me navigate the complex emotions that came with cutting ties with my biological family. Grief is normal, she reminded me during our sessions. You're not just grieving the family you lost, you're grieving the family you thought you had, the family you wished you could have had. But I was also building something new. My found family included Maria, the physical therapist who'd first opened my eyes to the truth. It included Jonathan, who'd become not just my lawyer but a trusted friend. It included Dr. Chen, my bandmates, my manager, and a growing circle of people who loved me for who I was, not what I could do for them. 6 months after the court case, I was performing at Madison Square Garden, a sold-out show that represented the pinnacle of everything I'd worked for. As I stood on that stage, looking out at 20,000 people singing my lyrics back to me, I thought about the girl who'd signed a recording contract and come home to share her joy with her family. That girl was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who understood that love isn't something you earn through performance or buy with money. Love is something you give and receive freely, without conditions or expectations. The irony wasn't lost on me that losing my biological family had led me to find my real one. The people who stood by me now were there because they chose to be, not because they were obligated by blood or motivated by money. During the encore that night, I dedicated my final song to everyone who's ever had to choose between family loyalty and their own well-being. The roar of approval from the crowd was deafening, but more importantly, it was genuine. After the show, as I was leaving the venue, I saw a familiar figure standing by the stage door. For a moment, my heart stopped. It was my father, looking older and smaller than I remembered. He saw me see him and held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to violate the restraining order," he called out. I heard the song on the radio, the one about the golden child, and I wanted you to know that I understand now. What we did to you, what I did to you. You were never our golden child, Rebecca. You were our daughter, and we forgot the difference." I looked at him for a long moment, this man who'd raised me and failed me in equal measure. "I hope you find peace, Dad. I really do. But my peace doesn't include you anymore." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I know. I just needed you to know that you were right to leave. You were right to save yourself." I walked past him to the car that was waiting to take me home. Not to the house where I'd grown up, but to the apartment I'd bought in Manhattan, decorated with photos of my chosen family and filled with the instruments that had saved my life. As we drove through the city, I rolled down the window and let the night air wash over me. Somewhere out there were 3 people who shared my DNA but had forfeited the right to call themselves my family. Somewhere else were the people who'd earned that title through love, respect, and genuine care. I had chosen my family, and they had chosen me. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.